Like these two are the main tools of fiscal policy: government spending and taxes. So whenever the economy is hit by a recession, so in recession, the economy's output has fallen and the unemployment has increased. So recession is going to cause lower output than the maximum output that a country can be able to achieve. So in recession, this is a condition of recession. So in recession, aggregate demand so in recession, output is less than its potential value. So so because economy is operating at its lower potential and unemployment has increased. So to control that output loss and unemployment, what the government can do, government can expand the economy by applying expansionary fiscal policy. And what does that mean? Expansionary fiscal policy is designed to increase the aggregate demand in the economy. And how the government would increase the aggregate demand? Expansionary fiscal policy is designed to either increase the spending or decrease taxes, or combination of both: increase government spending and reduce taxes, right? So this is how the government is going to enact the expansionary fiscal policy whenever the economy is going through a recession. So this is first scenario. Another scenario is uh, whenever there's a inflationary GDP gap, or whenever there's an uh, inflationary GDP gap, means when the economy is, let's say, operating beyond its potential. So because of a shock, aggregate demand has increased beyond the maximum potential, and now this is causing inflation in the economy, which is known as demand pull inflation. So when the economy's demand has increased beyond the supply, it is leading to inflation. So to control that inflation, what the government can do, government can contract the economy by using contractionary fiscal policy. Government can use contractionary fiscal policy to contract the aggregate demand of the economy, right? So so this means that government can cut down its spending, or government can increase its taxes, or it can apply the combination of both, means spending cut and tax increase. So this is how fiscal policy is being used by the government to stabilize the economy. And there are three core objectives that that in recession, output loss and unemployment has to be controlled by raising aggregate demand, by applying expansionary fiscal policy. And in inflationary GDP gap, a contraction is required so that inflation can be kept under control. So this is how it works. So now let's take an example. Let's take an example. Let's take an example. Let's like scenario. So suppose that Pakistan economy is currently going through a recession. Pakistan economy is in recession, right? And you know that in recession there's a loss of output and increase in unemployment. So because of a sudden drop in investment opportunities in Pakistan, which is caused by bad economic expectations, there's a drop in aggregate demand. So investment in Pakistan declined because of bad economic expectations of investors, that they are going to lose their investment if they continue to invest. So they are starting cutting down their investment. So uh, this would lead to a kind of recession in Pakistan economy. So suppose that economy was earlier in equilibrium. Right? This is the price level. This is output. I'm using aggregate demand and supply model to show this. This is aggregate demand and This is aggregate supply. Now, economy was earlier in equilibrium at this point with P level of prices and Y bar equal to 510 billion, let's say. Now, what happened? There was an equilibrium earlier, but because of a drop in investment as a result of bad economic expectation of people, there's a drop in aggregate demand. So when aggregate demand dropped from point A, so there's a shift in aggregate demand curve, which you can see here. There's a shift in aggregate demand curve from AD1 to AD2. Now the new equilibrium now the new equilibrium will not be here because prices in the short run are downward rigid, which means prices cannot go downward in the short run. They can go upward but cannot go downward. So the new equilibrium in the economy will be here, and this is a new equilibrium point which represents that y bar y the output now is equal to, let's say, 490 billion, right? So output now is now equal to 490 billion and economy is now in recession. So as a policymaker, you are asked, like, what should we do to bring back the economy to its potential? So you would say that we can use fiscal policy, expansionary fiscal policy, to bring back economy to its equilibrium, right? So how do we start? How from where we like how do we conduct the fiscal expansionary fiscal policy? We would suggest the government that okay, you may like increase spending to increase the aggregate demand, so you may increase the spending to increase the aggregate demand. So this is the first choice that is available to you. So the next question comes in, by how much we should increase the spending. So how do we know this? We need to know, we need to first calculate the output gap. So how do we calculate the output gap? Output gap means a fall in GDP. As output gap means the difference between what the country is currently producing and what the country is able to produce. So this is the output gap. So we know that output now is 490 billion and output maximum output that the country could produce was 510. So there's a 20 billion minus 20 billion drop in the output because of recession. So what would you suggest the government to increase government spending by 20 billion? No, we won't rely on this number. This is the output gap that we have to cover. So how do we do this? We would use some we would use a a multiplier to decide how much government should increase its spending. What is multiplier? A multiplier will tell us by how much output changes when, let's say, government is changing the spending by, let's say, 1 unit. Let's say change in G. So this is multiplier. This is multiplier. On the left side we have change in output, and on the right side we have this. This is called multiplier. This is called multiplier, 1 over 1 minus MPC. So suppose that MPC of this economy is given as 0.75. So how do we calculate the multiplier? We would calculate the multiplier as 1 over 1 minus 0.75. So it would be 1 over 0.25, and it would be 1 over 100 over 25, so it would be equal to 4. So we would say that the value of 1 over 1 minus MPC, or the multiplier in our case, is 4. So multiplier in an economy with 0.75 of MPC is 4. So this is the value of multiplier, right? So now the output gap was 20. So this was a drop in GDP in response to a recession, and the multiplier came up with a value of 4. The multiplier guides us that if the government is going to increase its spending by 1 rupee, the output is going to increase by 4 rupees. So it means that if the output loss is 20 billion in response to recession, so it means that government can raise its spending by 5 billion. 5 billion is an increase in government spending, and 4 is a value of multiplier. so that output could can be increased to 20 billion, and economy can be brought back to its full employment output. So how do we know this? We would say that 4 is a value of multiplier and 5 is an increase in government spending to increase the output by 20 million. We would write this way, like we would say that 4 is a value of multiplier and change in G should be equal to 5 billion. So 4 times 5, the change in output would be equal to 20. So this was the output gap from which we started. So this is a way. Now how do we apply this to above diagram? So now we know that government can increase its spending by 5 billion so that it can increase the output up to 20 billion and bring back the economy or get back the economy out of recession. So we will say that we will represent this in this diagram that okay, if government has to bring back the economy to its potential here, right, what the government can do, government can increase its initial spending has been increased, let's say. So there's a shift of aggregate demand curve which represents an initial increase in government spending of 5 billion. So this dotted line is representing the initial spending, initial spending, initial spending or increase in G by 5 billion. So this is a 5 billion increase, which will ultimately translate into, so there's a shift, there's a smaller shift in the aggregate demand curve, which you can see here. And over the period of time, this multiplier impact will magnify the impact and bring the economy back to its original level. So this is after the multiplier process has worked, and this would show us that if the government spending has been increased by 5 billion, right? So if the government spending has been increased by 5 billion, so over the period of time, it would increase to 20 billion. So economy is now brought back into its equilibrium after using government expansionary fiscal policy. So this is one way of bringing the economy back to its potential. Another way, another way could be like is to reduce taxes. Another tool of expansionary fiscal policy is to another tool of reducing another tool of expansionary fiscal policy is to reduce taxes. But again, the question comes by how much. So we will look into multiplier, and we know that multiplier is ratio of 1 over 1 minus MPC. So 1 over 1 minus MPC is already given. For example, this is 0.75, right? So MPC is 0.75. It means multiplier value is already given, which is equal to 4. Now we know the multiplier value, and we need to know now that if the government is going to cut down its taxes, it would raise the income by the amount of cut in taxes, which will ultimately increase consumption and savings in the economy, right? So let's say government is reducing its taxes by 6.67 billion. So output would increase by 6.67 increase in output. So this 6.67 increase in output would translate into changes in both. How do we calculate change in consumption? We would calculate change in consumption by multiplying 0.75, which is MPC, times 6.67. So this would be change in consumption would be equal to 5 billion, right? Change in consumption would be equal to 5 billion. And how do we calculate the change in saving? Because saving is not useful, because saving is going to reduce the consumption. So change in S would be 0.25, because MPC and MPS sum equal to 1. So if MPC is 0.75, MPS would be 0.25. So this is MPS. So MPS time the increase in income, 6.67. 1.67. So saving would increase by 1.67. So if, right, so these are the values that you need to calculate. Now you need to know, now you know here that if consumption increases by 5 billion, then aggregate demand would increase by 5 billion, right? So this is another way. So you would say that, okay, if taxes have been cut by 6.67 billion, right? So it would increase consumption by 5 billion, and a 5 billion increase in consumption with multiplier of 4, 5 billion increase in consumption with multiplier of 4 will increase aggregate demand by 20 billion, which is equal to the output gap that you calculated in above example, right? So so this would bring the economy back to its potential like it did in above case, right? So here you would say that now this this is not G, rather this is decrease in taxes by 6.67 billion. Now you need to ask one question, that why the taxes have been reduced in larger amount than the increase in government spending, because a part of decrease in taxes goes to saving. So we need to increase, we need to decrease taxes to raise aggregate demand uh, larger than the increase in government spending, right? So here we decrease the taxes 6.67 billion, so that consumption can be raised up to 5 billion in order to raise the aggregate demand in the economy, right?